The Habsburgs, just the name itself sounds like something out of a fantasy novel full of ancient castles, glittering crowns, and secret alliances, and in many ways, it was. For centuries, this family dominated Europe, not always through brute force, but through something far more subtle, yet equally powerful: marriage. They had a saying, "Let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry." They wove a complex web of alliances hoping to secure power, land, and peace across the continent. But sometimes even the most cunning plans fall apart, sometimes spectacularly. These are not stories of battles lost or empires crumbling under invasion, but of personal tragedies, political miscalculations, and the cruel hand of fate that turns seemingly brilliant unions into devastating failures. Brace yourself for 6 tales, where the crowns, the promises, and the very future of empires crumbled, not by swords, but by broken hearts, barren wombs, or the harsh realities of power. Number 1. Joanna of Castile and Philip the Handsome. The year was 1496. Europe was a chessboard, and the most powerful players were the ambitious rulers of Spain and the mighty Habsburgs. Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs who had just united Spain and funded Columbus's voyages, looked for an alliance to counter their old enemy, France. Across the continent, Emperor Maximilian I, the head of the Habsburg dynasty, had similar goals. Their solution was simple, yet grand: a double marriage. Prince John of Asturias, the sole heir to Spain's vast kingdoms, would marry Margaret of Austria, and for the second part of this monumental diplomatic dance, the fiery Spanish infantante Joanna would marry Philip the Handsome, Maximilian's charming and dashing son, the heir to the rich Burgundian lands in the Low Countries. The stakes were immense. This was not just about 2 people joining their lives. It was about 2 colossal dynasties, 2 emerging superpowers, creating a bond meant to reshape the future of Europe. The potential for a global superpower, uniting the wealth of Spain, the strategic might of Burgundy, and the prestige of the Holy Roman Empire was breathtaking. This Trastamara-Habsburg alliance was the ultimate power play. Joanna, at 16, was a spirited, intelligent, and deeply devout young woman. Philip, 18, was famously handsome, a true product of the flamboyant Burgundian court, charming, athletic, and full of life. When Joanna sailed for Flanders in the summer of 1496, the anticipation was palpable. The journey itself was a grand affair, her fleet battered by storms, a foreshadowing perhaps of the tempestuous life that awaited her. When she finally arrived in Lille, the capital of Philip's Burgundian court, the meeting was unconventional. Philip, impatient and eager, rushed to meet his bride without the usual formal introductions. Accounts from the time speak of an immediate passionate attraction. Their wedding, held in Lille in October 1496, was reputedly consummated with unusual haste, fueling gossip and delight alike. The initial spark was undeniable. For a brief period it seemed like a fairy tale, a golden match that combined personal passion with dynastic brilliance. But fairy tales rarely last in the harsh light of courtly life. Beneath the surface of their initial ardor, Joanna and Philip's personalities soon clashed dramatically. Philip was a true Renaissance prince, used to luxury, pleasure, and the adulation of a sophisticated court. He was famously charming, but also famously unfaithful. He had mistresses, and he made no great effort to hide them. Joanna, on the other hand, was intensely possessive, fiercely loyal, and deeply emotional. Her love for Philip bordered on obsession, and his infidelities drove her to the brink. She would lash out in jealous rages, confronting his lovers, even assaulting them, and then turning her fury on Philip himself. These outbursts, combined with her intense religious devotion, which sometimes manifested as reclusiveness, began to fuel whispers at court about her mental state. Was she simply passionate, or was something more troubling at play? Her formidable mother, Isabella, received worrying letters from Flanders, expressing concern about her daughter's erratic behavior. Then came the accidental inheritance, a cruel twist of fate that magnified the pressures on Joanna and Philip. The Spanish succession was a complex tapestry, and tragically, threads began to unravel with alarming speed. In 1497, Joanna's only brother, Prince John, the very heir who was part of the double marriage alliance, died unexpectedly. His pregnant wife, Margaret of Austria, then gave birth to a stillborn child, ending that line. Next, in 1500, Isabella, Joanna's elder sister, who had become Queen of Portugal, died in childbirth. Her son Miguel, who was now heir to Spain, died in 1500 at the age of 2. With these successive deaths, the unthinkable happened. Joanna, the third child, suddenly became the heiress, presumptive to the vast, wealthy, and powerful kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. The crown, which was never meant for her, was now within her grasp, or rather, within Philip's grasp. This new reality put immense pressure on Philip, who, rather than support his increasingly fragile wife, saw an opportunity to seize the reins of power in Spain for himself. Their relationship became a power struggle masked by personal drama. Philip's ambition grew as Joanna's mental health deteriorated. He sought to sideline her, to declare her unfit to rule so he could govern Spain in her name. Joanna resisted often, with violent outbursts that only served to confirm the court's growing belief in her madness. Her grief, coupled with Philip's cruel manipulations and infidelities, was a toxic brew. The final devastating blow came in 1506. Philip died suddenly in Burgos, Castile at the age of 28, possibly of typhoid fever, though rumors of poisoning circulated wildly. Joanna's grief was overwhelming, plunging her into a profound and lasting despair. She refused to let his body be buried for months. In a macabre procession, she traveled across Castile, carrying his coffin with her. She would stop periodically, often in convents, and insist on having the coffin opened, seemingly to gaze upon his decaying body. This public display of morbid grief, coupled with her continued outbursts and refusal to eat or sleep properly, cemented her reputation as Juana la Loca, or Joanna the Mad. The political consequences of her perceived instability were immediate and profound. Joanna's erratic behavior made her unfit to rule effectively. Her father, Ferdinand, swiftly seized the opportunity, claiming regency over Castile. Later, after Ferdinand's death, her eldest son, Charles V, who had been born to Joanna and Philip, took over the regency. For decades, Joanna was effectively imprisoned in the royal palace of Tordesillas, a gilded cage where she lived out her remaining 46 years. A queen in name only, separated from her children and completely isolated from the world. The grand union of Spain and the Habsburg lands, meant to be ruled jointly by two powerful and effective monarchs, instead led to a fractured regency and a queen who lived as a recluse. The failure of this marriage was not in producing heirs. Joanna and Philip had 6 children, including the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and Emperor Ferdinand I. Two of the most significant. The failure lay in the inability of the ruling partnership itself to function. The profound personal tragedy that unfolded between Joanna and Philip, exacerbated by his faithlessness and her deteriorating mental state, rendered one half of the partnership effectively useless. This forced the immediate and messy transfer of power to the next generation, under the shadow of a mother deemed incapable. The dream of a united, jointly governed superpower, born from the golden match of Joanna and Philip, dissolved into a saga of personal torment and political maneuvering. Number 2. Mary of Burgundy and Maximilian I. The year 1477 was a whirlwind of danger and opportunity for Mary of Burgundy. Her father, Charles the Bold, the last Duke of Burgundy, had just fallen in battle, leaving his vast and wealthy inheritance exposed. This wasn't just any inheritance. The Burgundian lands stretched from the rich Low Countries, bustling with trade and vibrant cities, down through Burgundy proper, a coveted prize, coveted by the powerful King Louis, the 11th of France. Mary, a young woman of just 20 years, suddenly found herself the wealthiest heiress in Europe, but also the most vulnerable. Her lands were under attack, her cities were rebelling, and every ambitious prince in Europe was clamoring for her hand in marriage. Her only hope for survival, for her very dynasty, lay in a swift, strategic marriage. King Louis XI of France was not one to wait. He moved swiftly, seizing territories in Picardy and the Duchy of Burgundy itself. Mary was under immense pressure from her own estates, the powerful representative bodies of her provinces, to choose a husband quickly, one who could protect them from the French lion. Many suitors were put forward, but the most promising, and arguably the most dangerous, was Maximilian, the young, dashing Archduke of Austria, son of the aging Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III. This marriage was a desperate gamble, a frantic scramble to save the Burgundian legacy from being swallowed whole by the aggressive French king. Maximilian, at 18, was everything a princess could want: brave, intelligent, and famously handsome, earning him the nickname the Last Knight for his chivalrous demeanor and love of jousting. He was a perfect foil to the wily, pragmatic Louis XI. Their wedding was not a grand affair, not a showy display of wealth like many Habsburg unions. Instead, it was a quiet, urgent ceremony held in Ghent in August 1477, reflecting the perilous situation Mary faced. There was no time for elaborate festivities. The French were at the gates. Against all expectations, amidst the chaos and political maneuvering, Mary and Maximilian developed a genuine affection. They were both young, strong-willed, and brave, united by the common threat from France. She was not just a political pawn to him. He genuinely admired her courage and spirit. He, in turn, offered her the military prowess and dynastic backing she so desperately needed. It seemed, for a moment, that this forced alliance might blossom into a powerful personal partnership. Maximilian, now Duke of Burgundy by right of his marriage, immediately plunged into the monumental task of defending the Burgundian territories against Louis XI's relentless aggression. He was a skilled military leader, a stark contrast to the often hesitant nature of his father. He fought bravely, leading his troops in person, and managed to secure important victories, pushing back the French and consolidating his hold over the wealthy Low Countries. Mary, for her part, was not a passive princess. She actively participated in the governance of her lands, issuing charters and decrees and lending her full support to Maximilian's efforts. For 5 years they fought side by side, building a formidable presence in the Low Countries. Then tragedy struck. In March 1482, Mary was out hunting with her falcons near the castle of Wienendael. Her horse stumbled, throwing her into a ditch. She suffered severe internal injuries. Despite desperate efforts, she died a few weeks later at the tender age of 25. Her death was a catastrophic blow, not just to Maximilian, who genuinely loved her, but to the fragile unity of the Burgundian lands and the ambitious Habsburg plans. Mary's sudden death shattered the delicate balance of power. According to Burgundian law, the marriage contract stipulated that, if Mary died without male heirs, her lands would revert to the French crown. Though she had given Maximilian a son, Philip the Handsome, the very Philip who would marry Joanna of Castile, he was only a child. The French immediately renewed their claims and seized the Duchy of Burgundy. Maximilian was left to fight for his young son's inheritance in the Netherlands, but he faced years of rebellion and conflict from the powerful Burgundian estates, who resented his foreign rule and saw an opportunity to gain more autonomy. Now that their beloved duchess was gone, Maximilian spent decades of his life fighting to secure the Burgundian Low Countries for his son, and by extension for the Habsburg dynasty. He eventually succeeded in largely incorporating these lands into the Habsburg patrimony, securing them for the future Charles V. This was a significant achievement. However, the core Duchy of Burgundy, Mary's namesake territory, was lost forever to France. The dream of a powerful Middle Kingdom, an independent Burgundy stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland, which her father had envisioned and which Mary and Maximilian had briefly tried to save, was extinguished. The early death of Mary meant that the full potential of this alliance was never realized. It secured one vital part of the inheritance. the wealthy Netherlands, which would become a jewel in the Habsburg crown for centuries. But it lost another crucial part, the Duchy of Burgundy proper, leading to generations of bitter conflict between France and the Habsburgs over these contested territories. What began as a desperate but hopeful union ended with the tragic loss of a vibrant young duchess and the permanent fragmentation of the Burgundian legacy she had fought so hard to protect. Number 3. Philip II of Spain and Mary I of England. The mid-16th century was a time of immense religious upheaval in Europe. The Protestant Reformation had splintered Christendom, and kingdoms across the continent were choosing sides, often with bloody consequences. In England, Queen Mary, the first daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, ascended the throne in 1553. A devout Catholic, she was determined to reverse her father's and brother's Protestant reforms and restore England to the true faith. But to secure her throne, produce a Catholic heir, and cement England's place in the Catholic world, she needed a husband. Her choice sent shockwaves through England and Europe. Philip II, King of Spain, son of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and at that moment the most powerful monarch in Europe. For Mary, this was a match made in heaven. Philip was not only a fervent Catholic, but he commanded vast wealth from the Americas and powerful armies. His father, Charles V, had been the guardian of Catholicism in Europe, fighting relentlessly against Protestantism. Mary believed a union with Philip would be a bulwark against Protestantism in England, and a strong alliance against France, England's traditional enemy. For Philip, it was an opportunity to extend Habsburg influence, add England's resources to his already enormous empire, and perhaps even gain an heir who could unite England, Spain, and the Netherlands under one Catholic crown. The political and religious stakes could not have been higher. But the English populace, largely Protestant and deeply suspicious of foreign influence, viewed the match with horror. They saw Philip not as a protector but as an ambitious, calculating foreigner who would drag England into Spanish wars and subordinate its interests to Spain's. Parliament resisted the marriage, fearing loss of sovereignty. Riots broke out in London and other parts of the country. Mary, already unpopular due to her religious persecutions, known as Bloody Mary, became even more loathed. When Philip arrived in England in July 1554, he came with a huge retinue of Spanish nobles and soldiers, looking to many like a foreign invader rather than a loving husband. The marriage ceremony itself was grand, held at Winchester Cathedral, but the union quickly proved to be an unhappy one. Philip was cold, formal, and spent little time in England. He found the English court dreary and the climate disagreeable. He spoke no English, and Mary spoke little Spanish, leading to a communication barrier that mirrored their emotional distance. Mary, for her part, adored him. She was desperately in love with him, showering him with affection and attention, but Philip saw her primarily as a means to an end, an heir, and England's resources for his ongoing wars against France. He spent most of his time in England attempting to secure funds from Parliament for his military campaigns. The most crucial aspect of the marriage was the production of an heir, a Catholic child, who could secure the future of the English throne. Mary suffered 2 phantom pregnancies, devastating for her and for the prospect of a Catholic successor. In 1555, after believing she was pregnant and even announcing a birth, it became clear there was no child. The same thing happened again in 1557. The emotional toll on Mary was immense, plunging her into deep depression and despair. With each phantom pregnancy, the hope for a Catholic heir faded further, fueling public disillusionment and casting a shadow over the future of the English crown. The political fortunes of England also soured under this alliance. Philip dragged England into his war against France, resulting in the humiliating loss of Calais in 1558, England's last continental possession, and a proud symbol of its historical claims in France. This loss was a national trauma, further fueling anti-Spanish sentiment and eroding Mary's already fragile popularity. Philip, having failed to secure a permanent heir and seeing England as a drain on his resources, spent less and less time there. He returned to Spain, leaving Mary alone and heartbroken. Mary's health deteriorated rapidly, plagued by a variety of ailments, possibly including ovarian cysts or uterine cancer. She died in November 1558 at the age of 42, childless and heartbroken. Her death left the throne to her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn. The grand plan to restore Catholicism in England and integrate it into the vast Habsburg sphere utterly collapsed. England remained Protestant, quickly cementing its identity under Elizabeth I. Far from becoming a loyal ally, England transformed into Spain's greatest rival, its privateers harrying Spanish treasure fleets, its queen openly defying Philip, and its navy challenging Spanish dominance seas. Philip's personal and dynastic ambitions in England were completely thwarted. What was meant to be a crowning achievement of Habsburg power instead became a bitter, expensive, and ultimately futile failure. Number 4. Leopold I and Margaret Teresa of Spain. The year 1666 saw a union of two Habsburg branches, not through distant diplomacy, but through close family ties. Leopold I, the Holy Roman Emperor, was a serious, studious, and deeply religious man, known for his love of music and his quiet demeanor. His bride was his own niece, Margaret Teresa of Spain, daughter of King Philip IV, and his second wife, Mariana of Austria. Margaret Teresa was also Leopold's first cousin on his mother's side. They had, in a sense, grown up together through famous portraits. The Spanish court painter Diego Velázquez had captured Margaret Teresa as a child in his iconic masterpiece, Las Meninas, and other portraits, sending them to Vienna to show the young emperor his future wife. This was a crucial union, meant to strengthen the bonds between the two powerful Habsburg lines, ensuring mutual support and, most importantly, securing the potential succession to the vast Spanish Empire. The marriage itself was one of the most opulent and theatrical events of the 17th century, celebrated in Vienna in December 1666. It lasted for weeks, a dazzling display of Habsburg wealth and power. There were elaborate operas, magnificent ballets, stunning fireworks, displays, and grand tournaments. Margaret Teresa, only 15, was a charming and cultured young woman, who despite her youth seemed to captivate Leopold. He genuinely loved her, and for a time their personal connection seemed strong. The court rejoiced, believing this union would usher in a new era of stability and prosperity. But the primary role of a dynastic bride, especially one of Margaret Teresa's standing, was to produce heirs, and the pressure on her was immense. She was pregnant almost constantly during their 6-year marriage. However, her health was delicate, perhaps a consequence of the generations of close cousin marriage that plagued the Habsburg line. She was frail, and the relentless cycle of pregnancy took a terrible toll on her young body. The years that followed their grand wedding were a succession of personal tragedies. Margaret Teresa suffered numerous miscarriages, stillbirths, and infants who died shortly after birth. In total, she had 6 pregnancies in 6 years. Only one child, Maria Antonia, survived to adulthood. A daughter was a good start, but the emperor desperately needed a healthy male heir to secure the continuation of his own line and strengthen his claim to the Spanish throne. Each lost child, each stillborn infant chipped away at Margaret Teresa's physical and emotional reserves. The relentless toll of constant pregnancies and repeated heartbreak marked her decline. Her body, already fragile, became worn out by the demands placed upon it. Margaret Teresa died in March 1673 at the age of just 21. She had barely reached womanhood, yet her life had been consumed by the dynastic demands of an empire. Her death was a profound personal tragedy for Leopold, who, despite his reserved nature, was genuinely devoted to her. He mourned her deeply, remembering her as his angel and Teresita. However, the failure of this marriage went beyond personal grief. The death of Margaret Teresa and the later death of their only surviving child, Maria Antonia, meant that the direct line of succession through this crucial marriage was broken. While Leopold would remarry twice, and have more children. The children from his subsequent marriages were not considered direct descendants of King Philip IV of Spain. Through Margaret Theresa, this distinction became critically important years later. When Charles II of Spain, Margaret Theresa's half-brother, died childless in 1700, the Spanish inheritance was plunged into a colossal succession crisis. Leopold, as the closest male Habsburg relative, felt he had the strongest claim, but the European powers, particularly France, feared the immense power of a united Habsburg Empire spanning Central Europe and Spain. The failure of Leopold's marriage to Margaret Theresa to produce a robust direct male heir who was unequivocally a descendant of the Spanish Habsburg line became a major contributing factor to the War of the Spanish Succession. The crown of Spain ultimately passed to a Bourbon prince, Philip V, not an Austrian Habsburg. The very purpose of the alliance to secure the Spanish throne for the Austrian Habsburgs and avoid a major European conflict ultimately failed, despite the initial personal affection between the emperor and his young, tragic bride. Number 5. Charles II of Spain and Marie-Louise of Orleans. The weight of an empire and the curse of generations of inbreeding rested heavily on the shoulders of Charles II of Spain. Born in 1661, he was the last of the Spanish Habsburg kings, known chillingly as El Hechido, the Bewitched. From birth, he was afflicted with numerous physical and mental frailties, a massive prognathous jaw that made it difficult to speak or chew, a large head, an awkward gait, and developmental delays. He was unable to walk until he was 4, or speak until he was 5, the product of centuries of relentless cousin marriages within the Habsburg family. He was a living testament to the dangers of maintaining dynastic purity at all costs. The desperate, overriding need for an heir, a healthy male heir, dominated his every waking moment, and the future of the vast Spanish Empire hinged precariously on his fragile health. To secure this vital heir, and perhaps even resolve the simmering tensions between Spain and France, a bride was sought. The choice fell upon Marie-Louise of Orleans, a beautiful, spirited French princess, the eldest niece of the mighty King Louis XIV. It was hoped that this marriage, uniting two of Europe's most powerful families, might bridge the deep-seated rivalry between Spain and France, and most importantly, provide a robust and healthy heir to the Spanish throne. Hopes were high that her youth and vitality would somehow counteract Charles's infamous debility. Marie-Louise's journey to Spain in 1679 was long and arduous, crossing the Pyrenees into a dramatically different world. She had grown up in the vibrant, extravagant, and relatively free court of Versailles, under the dazzling sun of the Sun King. Spain, by contrast, was somber, rigid, and steeped in a strict ancient etiquette that permeated every aspect of life. Its palaces were dark, its court stiff, its religious fervor overwhelming. Marie-Louise found herself homesick almost immediately. Isolated by language and custom, the immense pressure to produce an heir, a responsibility she could feel weighing on her from the moment she arrived, added to her despair. The tragic reality of the marriage quickly became apparent. Charles, despite his tenderness towards Marie-Louise, was physically incapacitated, unable to consummate the marriage properly, if at all, for many years. The union which was meant to be the salvation of the Spanish Habsburg line was barren. Marie-Louise, still so young, faced the cruel reality of her situation. She endured the endless cycle of false hopes, menstrual irregularities interpreted as signs of pregnancy, and bitter disappointments. The lack of children became a public scandal, fueling whispers and divisions at court. The blame often fell on Marie-Louise. Despite Charles's clear physical limitations, accusations of witchcraft and poisoning, old fears in the Spanish court began to circulate. Adding to her torment, Marie-Louise grew increasingly despondent and ill. She ate little, gained weight, and spent much of her time secluded. In February 1689, after 10 barren years of marriage, she died suddenly at the age of 26. Her death was mysterious, fueling rumors of foul play, with some whispering that she had been poisoned by those who wished to remove her and bring in a more suitable bride. Charles was devastated, genuinely mourning his queen. But her death, however tragic, did not solve the fundamental problem. There was still no heir. Desperate to secure the succession, Charles married again just a year later to Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess known for her fertility. Having come from a family with many children, yet this second marriage was similarly fruitless. Despite a change of queen, Charles II remained unable to produce a viable heir. The failure of both marriages to provide a legitimate, healthy successor sealed the fate of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. When Charles II finally died in 1700 at the age of 38, he was the last of his line. He left no children, plunging Europe into the colossal War of the Spanish Succession, as the major powers fought over the vast Spanish inheritance. This marriage and its tragic barrenness ultimately highlighted the inherent fragility of the Habsburgs' marriage strategy when confronted by biological reality and the consequences of generations of inbreeding. The end of the Spanish Habsburg line was a dynastic catastrophe, a direct consequence of the personal and biological failures of Charles II's unions, leaving a legacy of war and a kingdom. Number 6. Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. In 1770, a girl barely 15 years old, vibrant and full of youthful spirit, traveled from Vienna to Versailles. Her name was Maria Antonia, an Archduchess of Austria, daughter of the formidable Empress Maria Theresa. Her destination was the glittering, dangerous court of France, and her destiny was to become the wife of Louis Auguste, the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne. This marriage was more than a mere personal union. It was a grand strategic alliance designed to seal a diplomatic revolution, a dramatic reversal of alliances that had brought centuries of enmity between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons to an end. For France and Austria, this union was meant to usher in an era of peace, stability, and mutual support against their rival Great Britain. The hopes were immense, the expectations heavy. Maria Theresa, her formidable mother, had coached her daughter meticulously on how to charm the French court and secure her position. The ceremony of transference, a ritual steeped in symbolism, took place on an island in the Rhine River. Marie Antoinette, as she was now known, had to shed every stitch of her Austrian clothing, every piece of jewelry, and even her pet dog before crossing into French territory. It was a stark visual representation of her transformation from an Austrian princess to a French dauphine. But the new world she entered was cold, rigid, and filled with watchful, critical eyes. Versailles, though outwardly dazzling, was a hotbed of intrigue, strict etiquette, and constant gossip. Louis Auguste, her future husband, was an awkward, shy, and introverted young man, more comfortable with locksmithing and hunting than with courtly affairs or charming his vivacious bride. The early years of their marriage were plagued by a scandalous and deeply worrying problem. The union remained unconsummated. For 7 long years, the marriage, the very foundation of the Franco-Austrian alliance, remained unfulfilled. Whispers at court grew into open gossip, then into mocking jests and crude pamphlets. The lack of an heir, an obvious male heir, became a public spectacle. Empress Maria Theresa in Vienna sent increasingly frantic and frustrated letters to her daughter, urging her to address the matter, to secure her position by producing children. The problem lay with Louis. He suffered from a physical condition, likely phimosis, which made consummation painful and difficult. This issue was eventually corrected by a minor surgical procedure, but the delay, the endless waiting, and the mounting pressure on Marie Antoinette had a profound effect. She felt isolated and exposed, constantly criticized for the one thing she could not control. Her escape was into the superficial pleasures of fashion, extravagant gambling, and the private world of her Petit Trianon estate. where she could briefly forget the suffocating pressures of court. In 1774, Louis Auguste became king. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette became Queen of France. The pressure intensified finally after years of waiting. Children began to arrive. A daughter, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, in 1778, and then a son, Louis Joseph, the Dauphin, in 1781, followed by 2 more children. The succession, much damage had been done. The years of barrenness had created an image of a frivolous, self-indulgent queen. She was constantly criticized for her extravagant spending, her perceived foreignness, and her perceived influence over her hesitant husband. The scandalous diamond necklace affair of 1785, though she was innocent, further cemented her negative public image as the Austrian woman who squandered French wealth. Louis XVI, a well-meaning but weak and indecisive monarch, was unable to control the escalating discontent among his people or protect his queen from the relentless attacks. The Grand Alliance, meant to bring peace and stability, gradually dissolved into mutual distrust, and the internal chaos of France, economic hardship, enlightenment, ideas, and decades of misrule culminated in the French Revolution. In July 1789, the storming of the Bastille signaled the beginning of the end. The royal family found themselves trapped, their authority crumbling. Their desperate attempt to flee Paris in 1791, known as the Flight to Varennes, sealed their fate, proving to many that they were traitors to the nation. They were arrested, brought back to Paris, and imprisoned. The escalating radicalism of the revolution showed no mercy. Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI were put on trial, accused of treason against the French people. They faced their accusers with a mixture of dignity and despair. In January 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine. Marie Antoinette followed him to the scaffold in October 1793. The grand dynastic union orchestrated to secure peace, and the very existence of the French monarchy had failed in the most spectacular and catastrophic way imaginable. The Habsburg connection, once a symbol of alliance, became a liability, a mark of foreignness that fueled a revolutionary fervor. The marriage, intended to preserve a monarchy, instead became a prelude to its violent overthrow, forever altering the course of European history.